Welcome to the Dan Bradbury podcast. Today's show is going to be a special one. It's an interview between Dean Booty, one of Dan's clients, been with him for about 3-4 years, and Dan, and they're talking about Dean's journey to a 9-figure exit. He's the CEO and the founder of Store More, which is a self-storage company. He's also the host of his own podcast called Hacking Self-Storage, which is kind of his journey to this ambitious goal of a 9-figure exit. They're going to be talking about that journey and some of the highs and some of the lows, but what's great for you, especially if you also have an ambition to have an exit in your company, you're going to be able to learn from some of the mistakes that Dean's been making along the way so you don't have to make those yourself. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview between Dan Bradbury and Dean Booty of Store More.
Okay, and welcome, Dean. Thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Cheers, Dan. A lifelong ambition achieved to come on your podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, all right. So a good place to start. I mean, we've worked together for 3 years, something like that.
Yeah. I think this is coming to our 4th year.
Well, just before the pandemic, wasn't it? So, pretty good place to start, Dean. I've said a little bit in the intro, but I want to be clear. Your business is fascinating. One of the things I love about being in Mastermind, or I've got a Mastermind business, is I love learning about different industries. So, if you're listening to this right now and you're going to go, I'm not interested in self-storage, what's that got to do with me? Everything. I think there's so much to learn that can be carried over from one business model to another. And this is an industry that it's like, in a sense, it's like real estate. It's like property, but better. The returns on capital better. It's fascinating. And I think there's lessons that can directly relate to whatever business you're in as you listen to this. So give us a high level, Dean. Give us a bit more context about your background in self-storage, or just your background full stop, but really self-storage on why did you get into the industry? And you've got a great business that's making a lot of money and it's growing quickly, but tell us about the model. Sell us on self-storage, Dean.
Yeah, so firstly, I absolutely love self-storage. I've got a podcast called Hacking Self-Storage that has over 500 episodes of me sharing my numbers and everything. I used to be in betting. I used to be in gambling. Horrible. I have my own betting shop and I sold it to Corals because I could see everything going online. It was a horrible business, hated it. And I went in 2012 to America and I actually forgot my driving license. This is on my honeymoon. Forgot my driving license, which meant the wife had to drive. She nearly divorced me. And I remember all I was doing was playing Tiger Woods golf. So I was just on the iPad and she was not happy. And I kept seeing these self-storages popping up everywhere. I just sold to Corals, so I had a bit of money in my pocket. I didn't know what to do with my life. I started Googling self-storage in Beverly, and there wasn't a self-storage. So we opened up a self-storage in the next 3 months. I didn't know what to do, the revenue management, how to do anything about it, but it worked. It was pretty good. So that was in 2012. In 2016, we opened, that was an outdoor site. In 2016, we opened our first big site, our indoor site, and it's so sticky. We find a customer, and people expect to stay 2 to 3 months, but they normally stay between a year and 2 years. So it's reoccurring revenue that I absolutely love. The barrier to entry as well, it's tough because the capital expense to get involved in the business, first of all, for example, Willoughby, it was done over 6 phases, but in total, we spent about £1 million on it. So not everybody can compete with you. So there is a barrier to entry there as well. But yeah, I just love the fact my revenue, I'm not reliant on any one customer. I think the highest customer that I've got is just 1% of my revenue. So we're not relying on any one customer. We have move-ins and move-outs, and it's just a fascinating and great business model.
It's funny, because I would imagine most of the listeners here are familiar with property. I mean, they're probably familiar with self-storage. I mean, most people, I would imagine, who have moved house, etc., have took some stuff in self-storage at various times in their life. I know I certainly have. But for those that are listening that have had some buy-to-let experience, what about self-storage? Well, actually, Dean, if we go back right to the start, when you first we started working together in my mastermind, I think I told you that I didn't like your business. I didn't really get it. And I am now an absolute raving convert because it makes so much money and it's fascinating. So the way to think about it, and then we'll make it personal for the listeners, because again, it goes beyond self-storage to just good business skills. But most people are familiar with buy-to-let property. If you've done buy-to-let property, you know the game. It's like real estate goes up in value, and you've got income, you've got passive income and all that. But for those that know buy-to-let property, typically in residential property, HMOs, homes of multiple occupation, have got a higher yield. So you take a house, you divide it up into little flats or the little rooms, and then you let them out, and overall the yield is better. Well, that is self-storage, right? You take a big warehouse or whatever, or put the units in, and then you're renting out smaller space. So as you said, it's not a high percentage of the revenue, but it's beautiful because you don't have the legislation. I mean, oh my word, residential buy-to-let property is just got ridiculous in the last 5 to 10 years, but it's nowhere near to the same extent in self-storage, because it's kind of like, it's property. You're renting out space, micro space, but you don't have the health and safety regulations that you would do if somebody was actually living in it.
Yeah, in a nutshell, our 30,000 square foot building, we're renting now at £6 per square foot, and we're getting £27 per square foot back. But it's even better than that, because we're getting £27 per square foot over 2 floors. So in effect, we're doubling up. So our rent is really, across the 2 floors, is £3 per square foot, and we're getting £27 return on that square foot. Obviously, as long as people take the units.
Yeah, and then I love it because again, it's a residual income, and you know how long people stay. But because you've got so many individual units inside the site, it's only a percentage. And the beauty of these sites is when they mature, they make so much. And you also spoke about the barrier to entry, which prevents people from getting in. But if you can figure out how to get in, once you're up and running, I mean, the net margins in this type of business is just absolutely outrageous. Like, what are the kind of net margins that people can expect from self-storage sites, or on average? And perhaps I know your site's from a higher rate than that. And how long does it take to get full? Because of course you take on this big space, but it takes some time to get up to critical mass.
Yeah, I know I do. It's just going quickly back to the barrier to entry. That's for indoor self-storage. Outdoor self-storage, the problem is with outdoor self-storage now, but there's people are coming into outdoor self-storage because they know the returns on self-storage. For a quick example, in Beverley, it's a mature site. We haven't added any extra units now for some time. It probably takes 2 hours or 3 hours a week to run because we're 93% occupied. The rent there is £18,000, and the rates are £6,000, and we've got no water, very, very little electric, about £200 a month maximum, and we turn over £180,000 a year there. And so that's a mature site, and it's great margins. We've just done some projections. Me and Dan have been working on them for our new site in Mansfield, and what I do, worst case, middle case, and then best case. Our worst case will be hitting 40% return on our margins. All the big boys, the EBITDA, they're after of revenue. Normally, we hit 58%. Because we've got some expenses. Obviously, the more sites you got, the less expenses you have. But the big boys are hitting between 62% and 65% percentage from revenue to EBITDA, which is huge. It's massive.
Oh, it's outrageous. It's absolutely unbelievable. And again, just to not to get too in on Dean, but just correctly said, the more sites you've got, the less expenses you've got. You mean the overhead expenses are spread? So yes, yeah. So I do love it, and just to tease people, this is why this industry is so hot. So we're going to come back to this story later, but this is why there's so much money being thrown at you in why a certain billionaire offered you, 10 million quid within an hour of meeting you. Because this industry is so hot. And I think that probably the lesson for the listener is, look, whilst this might be a genuine investment route for somebody who's interested, and they can check out your Hacking Self-Storage podcast, just generally you kind of go, okay, what makes it so attractive? What makes the return so high? And at the root, it seems to me, Dean, that it's, you're solving a problem, but the primary one is just the recurring income. Because you've got the recurring income, people take the space, and I've certainly been guilty of it, and chances are the person listening's done this. They put stuff in. My favourite self-storage story from mine, Dean, was I moved house. I sold my house, and I was renting for a period, and I had a hot tub, and I put the hot tub in an outdoor self-storage facility, and it didn't cost much to store, so I didn't think about it. Anyway, fast forward 15 years, and it might not have been 15, but it was a good 10, right? And it's this hot tub is still in this outdoor self-storage site so much because I moved times and they weren't suitable to have the hot tub. And then it was just a monthly bill that I just paid. And eventually I actually just gave the hot tub away to an employee of mine on the basis that they had the flatbed trucks. He needed a flatbed truck because it was quite wide, because it was hard fixed, quite a big hot tub, to take it away. But meanwhile, that self-storage operator, Squab, there you go, Squab Storage, Emerson Spark.
I know them really well.
They had however many years of money where it was like, great. And what hassle did they, well, I mean, what did they give me? They literally just gave me a space for it. And that was it. And they must have made epic margin, everything he said. So the question for the listener is, where can you have a recurring income stream in your business? And actually, you don't need to make it complicated and stack loads of stuff. How can you just solve a problem for somebody? Because then the impetus was on me to take it out of self-storage.
You've got to do something, haven't you? Yeah, you've got to physically do something. My wife did exactly the same 3 years ago. She said, Dean, can we just have a unit before Christmas? Just 2 months before Christmas, just to sell the kids Christmas presents. Yeah, absolutely no problem. Fast forward 3 years, Dan. We haven't just got one unit. We've got 3 units. We've got 3 units full of Christmas presents. What?
Right, that is mental. And actually, this is a good segue, Dean, for the next question I wanted to ask you. It's about being focused on the wrong stuff, because we just said, look, at the root, can you get steady recurring revenue streams inside your existing business? And obviously self-storage is a perfect example of that, which is why it sells for so much money. But I know when we first started, Dean, tell us this, the infamous in our community hamster website story. So talk to us, you're classically entrepreneurial. Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned the betting side, a shop that you sold. You'd had other business interests, some successful, some miserable failures. But talk to us about the epitome of all business investments, hamster websites, and the lesson that you learned.
Yeah, the massive failed business, by the way, was a restaurant. Duh, jeepers. If anybody can make a restaurant pay, then I've just got full respect for them. Yesterday, we was all in a mastermind talking and going around the table, and so I was talking about my hamster website. I bought this hamster website, and it's basically a content model. You put content on there, Google gives you views, and then you get paid for the advertisement. So it was doing really good. It was like maybe £1,500 a month, £1,000 a month, and I didn't have to do anything. So I was talking to Stan about it, and it basically...
To be clear, you've got a site that's making 12 to 18 grand a year, and how much it cost you to buy this? Because you bought this as a business. Somebody already had it up and running.
Yeah, 20 grand. Yeah, $20,000.
Yeah. So basically the pitch was, you're making your money back in a year, right? It's kind of like, okay, and then you've got an asset that's giving you 100% ROI, and then you tried this out, and what happened then?
Yeah, so so I was saying, oh, this is fantastic, because I'm looking always at a new shiny new thing, and this is why I work really well with Dan, because Dan's just like, right, focus on one thing, Dean, focus on one thing. Where are you going? You can't keep doing this. And the problem I had in my business was I had a lease expiring, the outdoor container space, what we was talking about, my first site, it was expiring in a year's time. At that point, it was making £120,000 a year. And Dan kept saying to me, what are you doing to extend the lease? I goes, well, I've contacted him, I haven't done really much. And I've sent an email. He hasn't got back to me. And he goes, and you said to me, Dan, Dean, what the fucking hell are you doing? Why are you focused on this hamster website? You've got a business that's £120,000 a year profit. You're doing no work for it. Why are you worried about this hamster website? You need to be focused. You need to put in all your efforts in finding the landlord and getting an extra lease. And as soon as you said that, I was like, yeah, I need to prioritize, because why? It's £10,000 a month, £10,000 a month profit net. I don't do any work on it because I've got a great team, and even though the team spend maybe 2 or 3 hours a week on it, so it's not as though it takes any running for us. And yeah, I was too prioritized about this shiny new object of my hamster website. And yeah, it was good to get refocused. However, I still have got the hamster website.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm not anti the asset, but it is fascinating. Again, those listening to this right now is, where have you got your attention on the wrong thing? Because, while there was always, I'm sure you would have sorted it out, Dean, the chance are, yeah, but if you don't, and you're losing 10 grand a month of income, and actually, I think it was this site, it was a little bit of an unfortunate outcome, as in you did solve that problem, but yeah, you got a, if I'm remembering this correctly, a unfortunate competitor in the arrangement. Could you tell us about that, or was that a different site?
No, this was the same site. Yeah. So the reason why he wasn't replying to my emails was because he listened to my podcast, and on my podcast I share. I'm a bit too open, I suppose. I share absolutely everything. I share my revenue, I share my expenses, I share what's going well, where I've messed up, what I've done good. And he listens to the podcast. And we finally got hold of him because we went round to his house and said, look, can we sign this lease or we're not? And he was really open and honest with me and just says, I haven't replied because I'm trying to kick you out. I was like, you're trying to kick me out? Why? And he said, I'm starting to self-storage up. I've listened to your podcast and I thought, well, why don't I do it? And I was like, wow, thank you very much for being honest. And I immediately got in touch with solicitors, and luckily for us, the lease was inside the act, so he couldn't actually kick me out. However, he has started up in competition with me now, and he is the other competitor in Beverley. But self-storage is very, very easy to find out if there's demand. At the minute, it's 0.78 square foot per person. So if you look at the population, maybe it's 10,000 population, then it'll need 7,800 square foot of self-storage. Beverley is a population of 30,000, and it probably had 10,000 square foot of self-storage. So it was underserviced, and he came along and he's doing really well. We're still doing really well because the numbers add up. It was underserviced and it needed somebody else to come in. And so he came in and luckily he couldn't kick me out, because if he could, that podcast will have cost me not just the income and the profit that it's generating, but we also have high multiple exits as well. So I maybe will sell for 6 times, 7 times, or even 8 times multiple of profit. So that podcast could have cost me £800,000, up to £1 million. So I was very, very, very lucky.
Yeah, unbelievable. I do say, I guess I don't listen to the Hacking Self Storage podcast, but I do subscribe to your newsletter, and every day, Dean, you send out this newsletter and with all the stats in all your core business, which is fascinating. It's well worth people checking out, just because I think a lot of people Dean. I mean, let's talk about numbers, and then we'll go into billionaire land. But a lot of business owners have got no insight to the stats. They don't know the stats of their own business, let alone the competition. And yet you are all over it, right? The relevant stats. I mean, people know their revenue and profit, but you know and share on your newsletter the square footage gained or lost, so how much lost, how much gained, etc. And also the different revenue streams, not just the rental income, but the insurance, etc. How were you always that way inclined? Were you always obsessed with stats and numbers, or was it a learned skill?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I do it as well is because my dad had a business as well, and he sold for £1 million. And I always would love to know the ins and the outs, the trials and tribulations, and how he did it. What went right, what went wrong, and so I want to do it for my kids, because I want my kids to, if they ever want to see how they probably don't want to know or anything, but if they ever did, then I've documented the whole journey from really, really struggling to hopefully getting a little bit better and a little bit better, and hopefully in 5 years' time it'll be completely different again. So we can plot that graph and see the change, not only in the business but in me as well. Was I always like that? No. When I first came to you, Dan, I remember I went to a 2-day seminar. One was about marketing. I'm all over marketing, love marketing. And the other was about balance sheets and knowing your numbers. And I was like, oh my God. I was honestly totally out of my comfort zone. I didn't know how to read a P&L. I didn't know how to do anything. And that whole day, I remember thinking that I was the worst, 100% the worst in the class. Without a doubt, I probably was up there in the marketing. But in terms of numbers, I just used to think that the accountants deal with the numbers. I'll deal with the revenue. And then we'll have a yearly meeting. I'll pretend I understand what the accountant says, but really I don't. I'll just nod my head and say yes and no in the right places, and then I'll go on my merry little way. And then when I came across you, you made me feel that uncomfortable. Not you, but the situation. And I knew that I had to, like you always say, to have a better business, you need to be a better business owner. And so I needed to become uncomfortable for me to grow. And so then first few sessions, my reports, Dan, was absolutely dreadful. Now, it's my favourite time of the quarter is going through and making sure that the accounts are all in order and putting together all the information that you require.
Well, what changed? I mean, because I'm sure there's plenty of people listening to this that maybe intellectually they go, oh, yeah, I get that it's important, but it's any more than that, they're getting out that they don't do anything. What changed? Because I would say you are, if I think of the projections that you've done for this next site of yours, like it's amazing the detail because you're making a very significant investment, and it's going to produce an outrageously good return, right? But like it's fascinating the level of depth. What was the shift that happened? That like, how do you view it differently now? What beliefs changed?
I think the big change was I did it the other way. So when we first opened Willoughby, it sounds embarrassing this because I'm a person. I've been to Las Vegas speaking about self-storage, the World Conference. I've done the European Conference, and it sounds silly that just 6 years ago that I had no projections whatsoever when we opened Willoughby, and I had no idea where I was getting the money from. And honestly, it was one of the worst periods of my life because I couldn't expand. So we did phase one. Phase one, the maximum revenue we could take was £110,000 with phase one. The problem is my rent alone was £160,000. Then I had rates of 63,000, so I had to expand, but I had no money to expand because I didn't do the projections, and it caused so much stress. I was there with my kids, but I wasn't really there, and I just knew that I did have to change in some way. And then obviously going on that 2-day event with you, it made me realise that now when I talk about numbers, I'm so much more confident when I go in to speak to somebody about a loan, or when I'm putting together a package to have another location, that I send my management accounts, and the feeling I get is amazing because everything's in order. And so like now I know that we've just done my cash flow forecast. I know next July I'm going to have a cash flow problem, and I'm not going to have a problem until next July. So now I can plan for that. Do you know how I got over my cash flow problems in with the first site, Willoughby? This is in 2017. I had then a podcast called The Betting Guy, and I had a £70,000 bill that I just couldn't pay. I had it on my desk to pay, 28 days to pay it. Luckily, my podcast had 60,000 downloads a month, so it was a relatively big podcast in the industry. And I thought, right, what do the customers need? And I created this little bit of software. And when your back's up against the wall, you have to do something. And I created this little bit of software. And luckily, within 8 weeks, I sold £100,000 worth of software to people, and it was recurring. And one thing and another, it was amazing. It was a great bit of software, and I just got lucky. But I couldn't keep doing that. And so I'd rather know what's going around the corner now than not, and just all of a sudden get sucker punched with a bill and just think, holy. I remember exactly where I was and just thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? I can't go to my parents. My parents are thinking I'm an absolute loser, and I had no options whatsoever. And so luckily I did have that podcast with 60,000 downloads a month, so I could go into that. But yeah, without that, I don't know what the journey would have finished before I even started.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me, Dean, how as I've seen your financial literacy develop. It's kind of like if people want to track money, the people that are lending the money, either as an angel investor or as a PE or as a, whatever, or as a bank, it's like they want to know that the money is safe and it's going to work. So therefore, you, the entrepreneur, like you, clearly I'm biased, but it's that you need to develop financial literacy and financial acumen. And so that helps you if you're trying to scale the business, or if not, just to optimize things. And I know in your world with an old previous accountant, when you became literate, it became apparent very quickly that they'd done a variety of things wrong. And to be clear, I'm not telling anybody listening to this that they should be their own accountant. You and I are not doing VAT returns or corp tax returns or any of that stuff, but you know what questions to ask. And you uncovered, well into 6 figures worth of mistakes that it would have cost you from what the old accountants had done incorrectly.
Yeah, it was a family friend as well. It was a family friend. It was a horrible experience going through that. And you trust your accountant, you think that he knows exactly what he's doing, but it turns out that he's a lovely, lovely bloke, absolutely amazing person, but the mistakes he was making was crazy. When I told him about you, Dan, he said that only big businesses do management accounts and monthly accounts. He said, you're not a big business. You need to be turning over multiple millions. He said, and by the way, this guy didn't like software at all. He liked, the old spreadsheets that he'd do himself. And it was two worlds colliding, and I had to change, because otherwise I just couldn't see a way out.
Right. And that was an example of one of the things that freed up extra profit and cash flow that allowed you to reinvest in growth, right? And beautifully so. But still, in your business, because of the nature of it, there's a high barrier to entry because there's a high level of capital expenditure required to get a new site listed. And so, as is often the case with banks, they will give you an umbrella when it's sunny and take it away when it's raining. So that, banks, they're wising up a little bit, but they were never particularly keen on you or on this industry from a loan perspective. And so I introduced you to a friend of mine who likes to keep his name low profile, so we won't mention his name on this podcast because he does not like being on social media, but he's a self-made billionaire. And we went down to his house in Chelsea, and why don't you tell us that story, Dean? What happened? Because you were thinking about taking an investment for growth. What was your experience?
Yeah, it was absolutely surreal. It was an amazing experience, and I massively thank Dan. And I do feel sorry for Dan, the fact I didn't take it as well. But it was crazy. I've been the fail of a week many times on Dan's podcast. I was running in Tenerife one morning before the kids got up, and I was running, and then he started talking about the fail of a week, and he started talking about me, and I'm like, oh no, I can't, Jesus, give it a rest, Dan. Anyway, yeah, so we went down to this massive house in Chelsea, obviously the richest real estate you can think of. Beautiful house, amazing. We rang the door.
And here's the side note, Dean. I happened to see it yesterday. I don't know how I ended up on this site, but it was talking about the richest, the most expensive streets in the UK, and that particular street, which is an obscurely named street in Chelsea, was one of them. I think it was in, I can't remember which newspaper it was in. And there was a photo, and it was this person's house was in the background. I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah. But the cost of his house brings up the average of the streets.
Yeah, it's probably like 4 or 5 times bigger than everybody else's house right at the end of it. And we rang the doorbell, and a butler answered, real nice guy. We came in, and it just like the ceilings are massive, and everything you'd expect. Went into this room, and what was a Napoleon picture? I was like, Dan, look at that. There's a sign. But I was like, oh my God, that's worth millions alone. And then we sat down on these massive couches. And do you know, I did a podcast about the lessons I learned from it, because I wasn't prepared for how quick he was, how quick he thought. He got the concept straight away and just, right, how much do you want? I'm like, well, I don't really know. And so I think time with billionaires or with mega successful people, they realise that they get to the crux of the matter straight away, and they just make a decision very, very fast, and they don't want to waste any precious time, and so they get straight to it. And yeah, it was an amazing experience. And then he seemed to like self-storage really, really well. He almost couldn't believe that the numbers I was telling him was true. Good job I had Dan there, because obviously Dan's seen the growth of the company for 3 to 4 years anyway, and so he's seen the proof of what we do. And he just really surreal, just offered me I think he valued the company at something like 4.5 million. He was going to buy 49% out, and then he was going to loan me £10 million a year or every 2 years to do 5 sites a year. And he just said, this was in the space of 20 minutes, Dan. He was already mapped out what he was going to do, and was going to take over. He was going to potentially look at Europe. It was just so surreal, and there was a lot to think about, a lot to take away. And it was. I always want to put myself in not uncomfortable situations, but I want to learn from other people, and it was at a different level.
Well, I was going to say there's a couple of lessons. I mean, I'm going to ask you in a second, Dean, what you'd say to somebody listening to this about, because ultimately you got an offer, and you decided not to take it. But I suppose there's two sets of two questions. One is, what would you say to somebody thinking about exploring it? Because I did find it amazingly insightful how quick and he's clearly not a stupid guy. You don't get to be a self-made billionaire from entrepreneurial endeavors without having your wits about you. But it was stunning how quick he asked questions and got to the nub of understanding what the important bits were. And he didn't really know self-storage, but obviously he gets property. And then he was able to quickly say, yeah, the return on capital are immense. The margins are immense. I get that, how long it takes to get up to capacity. Asked all the questions. And therefore he was like, on that principle, I'm happy to, value the company at X and offer Y because I'm going to get a return. But what lessons would you, what things would you emphasize to people listening to this, considering about taking on an investor to grow? But also, why did you decide not to do it?
Yeah, so my big takeaway, be crystal clear on what you want. I remember going backwards and forwards with Dan, and Dan saying, well, just be totally honest and say, this is what I want, and if we can't match it, then there's no deal. There's no problem. It just doesn't work out. It happens every single day. And so I had to get crystal clear on what I wanted. And as it happens, I told him exactly what I wanted, and he said, yeah. And I was like, oh, shoot. Because in the back of my mind, I didn't really want to do it. And I think the reason why I was going to do it is my dad's 70 years old, and my dad's got 25% stake in my business. So I knew that it would change my dad's life, because although he had an exit for £1 million, it sounds stupid, but I don't think £1 million is a lot of money, especially to live out the rest of your life. He's just built his house. And so I knew that my dad's life would completely change with this, because I could pay my dad off completely out of it, and he'd have X amount of money to do what he wants with. But after I talked to mum and dad about it, they wasn't actually that bothered or concerned whatsoever. And the reason why I personally didn't do it is because it's each to their own. What I call success is different to what Dan calls success, and what everybody's success is different. My success is that I love self-storage. I love doing what I'm doing. However, I do have a hell of a lot of white space. My enjoyment is going for a run in the morning, going for a big long walk in the afternoon, going for a coffee. I get all that time. I get to listen to every single podcast I want to listen to. I educate myself. I listen to books nonstop. I see that as my job. And I've got an operations manager to run the business. I've got different managers to run different sites. And that is important to me. And I get to take the kids to school. I'm here when they come home. And I'm not preaching saying this is going to be everybody's way of life. This is just what I enjoy. I really, really respect and enjoy my own time. But not only that, I like time with my kids as well. Playing football with them in the morning, making sure I get them dressed and being there, packing the bags, all the stuff that annoys the hell out of you at the time. But I do think that I'll appreciate it. And I think the reason why I think like this is because when I was a kid, my dad was always working so much that I thought my granddad was my dad. And so I potentially gone the opposite way because of how I was brought up. And now my kids are probably going to work loads, because it's just the way things work. And that's why I said no, because I thought that I would be under a lot of pressure to find 10 new sites every 2 years. And it meant that I'd be on the road a lot. I'd be traveling. I'd be away from home. And it just didn't match up to my values of success, because yes, I've had more money, but I'm not doing too bad now, and I'm going to grow, but I'm going to grow slowly. So I'm going to get to a certain level, but I could get to maybe 10x that level if I took his money. But I realized that the money isn't as important to me as I thought it was. It's the time that I spend and how I spend my time that was more important. So it's each to their own, but I genuinely, I went backwards and forwards with this, didn't I, Dan, for a long, long time. I spoke to so many different people, and I learned so much about myself because I realized what is important to me rather than what I thought was important to me. So it was a brilliant exercise, one of the best exercises I've ever been through in my life.
Yeah, I love it. Well, very nice said, Dean. Are there any final thoughts, comments, questions you want to leave any of our listeners with? And then finally after that, can you tell where should people, if they want to reach out to you, how can they track you down?
Yeah, so I was on the phone. I was on before this interview. I was talking to somebody, and they was asking me why I put all the content out, and the reason is twofold. Because one is because I want my kids to see exactly what I do and how I've done it, but also I do think that I've been given and blessed with a very, very nice living from self-storage, and not just nice living in terms of money, but also spending time how I want to spend my time. And if I can help one person do that, then it means the absolute world to me. I must get one email a week saying I've changed their life because I started the self-storage up. And you can do asset, but just really, really quickly, it doesn't have to be massive amounts of money to start an indoor self-storage up. You can start with an outdoor self-storage and do containerized, and you can get funding through asset finance, and it can almost pay for itself. So you don't need a lot of money to do it. So that's why I put all the content out, and I really get a kick out of just, if I can impact one other person positively, then brilliant. In terms of following me, I've got my newsletter called MrSelfStorage.com. Just head on over there, put your name, put your email address in, and I'll send you an email every single day about my numbers, my figures, how much we're taking, and a business tip a day, self-storage tip a day. A lot of the time I mention Dan because I take a lot of, obviously, his content as well, put it in there. And so, yeah, I just love that. And that's basically the best way. And if you send an email, a reply to that email always comes to me as well. So I'll always get it. But I'm on LinkedIn as well, LinkedIn Dean Booty. So if anybody wants any questions, then yeah, let me know. Hit me up and I'll reply.
Dean Booty, thank you very much.
Cheers, Dan.
I hope you enjoyed that episode.
3 things you need to do now. Number 1, make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you do not miss an episode. Also, get on over to Amazon to get a copy of my latest book, Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity, 9.5 steps to improving your profits and cash flow. Also, join our Facebook group, the Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity community, to connect with other business owners.